The sound of sobbing carried through the open window of the small wooden house on the edge of Awahi, Nevada, reaching Fletcher Vance as he rode past on his way back from checking fence lines in the summer heat of 1882. He pulled his horse to a stop, the dust settling around the animal's hooves as he listened to the heartbroken wails that seemed to tear through the dry desert air. Fletcher had been drifting for the better part of 3 years now, working ranches across Nevada and sometimes into California, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. He had learned early on that involving himself in other people's sorrows rarely ended well, but something about those particular cries made his chest tighten in a way he could not ignore. He dismounted, tying his horse to the weathered post outside the modest dwelling, and approached the door. Through the window, he could see a woman bent over something, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Fletcher knocked gently, then more firmly when there was no response beyond the continued weeping. Finally, he pushed the door open slightly and called out in what he hoped was a gentle voice. "Madam, are you hurt? Do you need help?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. Fletcher stepped inside, removing his hat respectfully as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. The woman turned to face him, her face streaked with tears, her dark hair falling from its pins in disarray. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with striking features that were currently twisted in anguish. But what caught Fletcher's attention most was what she stood beside, an intricately carved wooden cradle, completely empty, rocking slightly from where her hands had just released it. "I am sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I did not mean to disturb anyone. Please just go." Fletcher did not move. He was 27 years old and had seen his share of tragedy on the frontier, but the sight of this woman weeping over an empty cradle struck something deep within him. "My name is Fletcher Vance, madam. I was riding past and heard you. If there is anything I can do to help, I would like to try." She laughed bitterly, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "Unless you can bring back the dead, there is nothing anyone can do." Fletcher's throat tightened. "Your child?" "No," she said, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I have no child. That is precisely the problem. This cradle was my mother's and her mother's before that. My husband and I have been trying for 3 years to fill it, 3 years of hoping and praying and nothing, and now—" She broke off, turning away from him. "Now," Fletcher prompted gently, "now he is gone. Robert died 2 months ago when his horse threw him and he struck his head on a rock. We had barely been married 4 years, 4 years, and I have nothing left of him. No child to carry on his name, no baby to hold and remember him by, just an empty cradle and an empty house and an empty life." Fletcher stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, unsure of what to say. He had never been good with words, had always been better with actions. "What is your name, madam?" She turned back to him, her red-rimmed eyes meeting his. "Josephine, Josephine Jenkins. My husband was Robert Jenkins. We came here from Missouri 5 years ago, thinking we would make our fortune. Instead, I have made nothing but memories of loss." Fletcher stepped further into the room, noting the tidy but sparse furnishings, the worn curtains at the windows, the photograph on the mantel of a young couple on their wedding day. Josephine followed his gaze and made a small sound of pain. "I am sorry for intruding," Fletcher said quietly. "But I do not think you should be alone right now." "I have been alone for 2 months," Josephine replied, her voice flat. "What difference does one more day make?" Fletcher set his hat on the table and moved closer to the cradle. He ran his hand over the smooth wood, noting the careful craftsmanship, the love that had gone into its creation. "This is beautiful work," he said. "Your grandfather made it." "My great-grandfather," Josephine corrected. He was a carpenter in Pennsylvania. My grandmother brought it west when she married, and my mother brought it further west when she married. I always thought I would fill it with babies of my own, that I would pass it down to my daughter one day. But now, it seems it will just sit here empty, a reminder of everything I have lost. Fletcher looked at the cradle, then at Josephine's grief-stricken face, and felt something shift inside him. He had spent 3 years drifting, avoiding connections, keeping his heart carefully guarded after losing his own family to fever back in Texas. But standing here in this small house in Awahi, Nevada, looking at this beautiful broken woman, he felt a sudden and overwhelming need to do something, to help in whatever way he could. "Fill it with hope," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the words. "Then fill it with life." Josephine stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "What?" Fletcher took a breath, committing himself to whatever this was. "You said the cradle is empty and that is all you can see right now, but maybe that is not the end of the story. Maybe the emptiness is not a symbol of loss but of possibility. Fill it with hope first, hope for the future, hope that life can be good again. And then, when you are ready, fill it with life." "You are mad," Josephine said, but there was less bitterness in her voice now, replaced by a kind of bewildered curiosity. "I just told you my husband is dead. How exactly am I supposed to fill a cradle with life?" Fletcher met her eyes steadily. "I do not know yet. But I know that giving up on hope is the same as giving up on living. And you are too young to give up on living, Mrs. Jenkins." "Miss Jenkins now, I suppose," she said quietly. "Or I would be if I went back to my maiden name, but I cannot seem to let go of being Mrs. Jenkins, even though there is no Mr. Jenkins anymore." "Then do not let go," Fletcher said. "Keep his name, honor his memory, but do not let his death be the end of your story." Josephine sank into the chair beside the cradle, looking exhausted. "Why do you care? You do not even know me." Fletcher considered the question. Why did he care? He could have ridden past, ignored the crying, continued on his way to the ranch where he was currently employed. But something had stopped him, something he could not quite name. "Maybe I needed to hear those words as much as you needed to hear them," he admitted. "I have been drifting for 3 years, running from my own losses. Maybe it is time for both of us to stop running and start hoping again." Josephine looked at him for a long moment, her tears finally beginning to slow. "What did you lose?" "My parents and my sister," Fletcher said. "Fever took them all within a week. I was 24 and suddenly completely alone in the world. I sold the family ranch, took the money and just started moving. I have been moving ever since." "I am sorry," Josephine said softly. "That is terrible." "So is losing a husband at 24, Fletcher replied. 23, she corrected. "I am 24 now." "I was 23 when Robert died." They sat in silence for a few moments, two strangers bound by grief and loss. Finally, Josephine spoke again. "Would you like some coffee?" "It is the least I can offer after you stopped to check on me," Fletcher nodded. "Coffee would be fine, thank you." As Josephine moved to the small stove to prepare the coffee, Fletcher studied her more carefully. She was slender, almost too thin, as if grief had stolen her appetite along with her joy. But she moved with a kind of grace despite her obvious exhaustion, and he could see the strength in her that had kept her going through 2 months of widowhood in a harsh frontier town. Her dress was faded but clean, mended carefully in a few places, and her hands showed the calluses of hard work. "Do you have family here?" Fletcher asked. "Anyone to help you?" Josephine shook her head as she measured coffee grounds into the pot. "No, my parents died during the journey west. Cholera, Robert and I were all each other had. His family disowned him when he married me because they wanted him to marry someone with money and connections. I was just the daughter of poor farmers, not good enough for their son." She laughed bitterly. They did not even come to his funeral. I sent a telegram and they never responded. Then they are fools, Fletcher said firmly, and they do not deserve to have known him. Josephine glanced at him, something like gratitude flickering in her eyes. That is kind of you to say. It is the truth. Any man who would marry for love instead of money is a man of character. And any woman who would work this hard to survive alone is a woman of strength. I do not feel very strong, Josephine admitted. Most days I feel like I am barely holding on. The ranch is too much for me to manage alone. Robert's partner, Samuel Miller, has been good about keeping things running, but I know he wants to buy me out. He has made several offers. I keep refusing because selling would mean admitting that this chapter of my life is truly over, that I have nothing left here. Fletcher felt a stirring of something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose. What if you did not have to sell? What if there was another option? Josephine poured the coffee into 2 chipped cups and handed one to Fletcher. What option? I cannot run a ranch alone, and I cannot afford to hire help. Samuel's offers are fair, but they are not generous. I would have enough to go back east, maybe, to start over somewhere. But the thought of leaving feels like abandoning Robert's memory, like admitting defeat. Fletcher sipped his coffee, thinking. How much land do you have? 300 acres. It is not a large spread, but it is good grazing land. We had built the herd up to about 200 head before Robert died. Samuel has been managing them, taking his share of the profits. But it is not sustainable long term. What if you had a partner, not someone to buy you out, but someone to work the ranch with you to help you build it back up? Josephine looked at him with sudden understanding, and color rose in her cheeks. Mr. Vance, we just met. You cannot possibly be suggesting what I think you are suggesting. Fletcher felt his own face heat. I am not suggesting anything improper, madam. I am simply thinking out loud. You need help, and I need to stop drifting. Maybe there is an arrangement that could benefit us both. What kind of arrangement? Josephine asked warily. Fletcher set down his coffee cup and met her eyes. Let me work for you. I am good with cattle and horses, and I know how to run a ranch. I grew up on one in Texas. You would not have to pay me much, just room and board and a small wage. In return, I would help you keep the ranch running, help you hold on to what you and your husband built together. Josephine bit her lip, clearly torn. Where would you stay? This house is small, and it would not be proper for you to stay here with me unchaperoned. Does the ranch have a bunkhouse? Or I could build a small cabin somewhere on the property. I am handy with carpentry. There is an old line shack about a mile from here, Josephine said slowly. Robert and I used it when we first arrived before we built this house. It needs work, but it is still standing. Then that is where I will stay, Fletcher said. You can think about my offer, Mrs. Jenkins. I will be working at the Double R Ranch for another week, and then my contract is up. If you decide you want my help, send word. If not, I will move on and wish you well. Josephine studied him for a long moment. Why would you do this? You could work anywhere for anyone. Why would you want to work for a widow with a struggling ranch? Fletcher stood, picking up his hat. Because today, I heard a woman weeping over an empty cradle, and something inside me said I needed to help if I could. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I have learned to trust my instincts. They have kept me alive this long. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Fill it with hope, Mrs. Jenkins. That is the first step. Everything else will follow. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Josephine alone with her empty cradle and a head full of confused thoughts. She walked slowly back to the cradle and knelt beside it, running her hand over the smooth wood as she had done countless times before. But this time, instead of feeling only emptiness and grief, she felt the tiniest spark of something else. Something that might, if she dared to nurture it, grow into hope. The week passed slowly for both Fletcher and Josephine. Fletcher threw himself into his work at the Double R Ranch, fixing fences and breaking horses, and trying not to think too much about the woman with the sad eyes and the empty cradle. He told himself he had done his good deed, offered his help, and what she chose to do with that offer was her business. But he found his thoughts drifting back to her again and again, wondering if she was still crying, still standing over that cradle with her heart breaking. Josephine, for her part, spent the week in a state of confusion and uncertainty. Part of her wanted to send word to Fletcher immediately, to accept his offer and grasp at the lifeline he had thrown her. But another part of her was terrified of what it might mean to let a stranger into her life, to depend on someone again after losing Robert so suddenly and completely. She visited the cradle many times that week, but she found herself crying less and thinking more. Thinking about what Fletcher had said, about filling the cradle with hope first, then life. On the 5th day after Fletcher's visit, Josephine made a decision. She put on her best dress, the dark blue one she had worn to church services before she stopped attending after Robert's death, and walked into the center of Awahi. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. She went to the general store and asked the proprietor, Mr. Henderson, if he could send word to Fletcher Vance at the Double R Ranch. "What message should I send, Mrs. Jenkins?" Mr. Henderson asked, his curiosity evident. Josephine hesitated, then said firmly, "Tell him I accept his offer. Tell him to come to the ranch when he is ready." Mr. Henderson's eyebrows rose, but he was too polite to ask questions. "I will send my boy out this afternoon, madam." "Thank you," Josephine said, and then, because she suddenly felt lighter than she had in months, she added, "And Mr. Henderson, I would like to buy some seeds. Flower seeds if you have them." "Flower seeds, madam. It is a bit late in the season for planting." "I know," Josephine said. "But I want to plant them anyway. For hope." Mr. Henderson smiled, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I think we can find you some seeds, Mrs. Jenkins. I think we can indeed." Fletcher received the message while he was in the barn at the Double R, brushing down one of the horses after a long day's work. The ranch owner's son, a boy of about 12, came running up to him with a piece of paper clutched in his hand. "Mr. Vance, message for you from town." Fletcher took the paper and unfolded it, his heart beating faster as he read the simple words. "I accept your offer. Come when you are ready, J. Jenkins." He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, then looked down at the boy. "Thank you for bringing this. Tell your father I will work through the end of the week as agreed, but then I will be moving on to a new position." The boy nodded and ran off, and Fletcher returned to brushing the horse, but his mind was far away. He was thinking about Josephine, about the ranch she was trying to hold on to, about the empty cradle and the possibility of hope. He finished his work in a daze, ate his dinner mechanically, and lay in his bunk that night staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had just committed himself to. 2 days later, Fletcher rode up to Josephine's house with all his possessions packed in his saddlebags. It was not much, just some clothes, his bedroll, a few tools, and his father's old rifle. He had never been one to accumulate things, preferring to travel light and keep moving. But now, looking at the small house and the land stretching out beyond it, he felt a strange sense of homecoming, as if he had been searching for this place without knowing it. Josephine came out onto the porch as he dismounted. She looked different than she had a week ago, less haunted, though still bearing the marks of grief in the shadows under her eyes and the thinness of her frame. She wore a simple work dress and an apron, and her hair was pulled back in a practical bun. "Mr. Vance," she said, nodding at him. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Mrs. Jenkins," Fletcher replied. "I promise I will work hard and do right by you." "I know you will," Josephine said, and there was a note of certainty in her voice that surprised them both. "Come, I will show you the line shack. I have cleaned it up a bit and put some basic supplies there. It is not much, but it should be adequate." They walked together across the property, Fletcher leading his horse. The land was beautiful in a harsh, desert way, with sagebrush and scrub dotting the landscape and mountains rising in the distance. The sun beat down hot and relentless, but there was a breeze that carried the scent of dust and wild grasses. "How many cattle do you have now?" Fletcher asked as they walked. "I am not entirely sure," Josephine admitted. "Samuel keeps the books. He said we are at about 180 head after the spring calving. Some were sold to pay debts after Robert died." Fletcher nodded. "That is a good foundation to build on. With proper management, you could grow the herd significantly over the next few years." "That is what Robert always said," Josephine replied softly. "He had such plans for this place. He wanted to build it into something substantial, something we could pass down to our children." Her voice caught on the last word, and she fell silent. They reached the line shack, a small structure made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. It was basic but solid, and Fletcher could see that Josephine had indeed cleaned it thoroughly. There was a narrow bed with fresh blankets, a small table and chair, a wood stove and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A bucket of water sat by the door, and there was a shelf with some basic food supplies: flour, coffee, salt pork, beans. "This is more than adequate," Fletcher said. "Thank you for preparing it." Josephine nodded. "I thought you would want to get settled right away. Tomorrow morning I can take you to meet Samuel and show you around the rest of the property. We can discuss what needs to be done and how we should divide the work." "That sounds like a good plan," Fletcher agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Jenkins, I want you to know that I meant what I said before. I am here to help you, nothing more. You do not need to worry about my intentions." Josephine met his eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "I know, Mr. Vance. I trust you. I do not know why, given that we barely know each other, but I do." "I will do my best to be worthy of that trust," Fletcher said quietly. Josephine left him to settle in, and Fletcher spent the rest of the afternoon arranging his few possessions and getting a feel for his new home. As the sun began to set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple, he sat on the porch of the line shack and looked out over the land. He felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, of purpose. And he thought about Josephine, about the grief she carried and the strength it took to keep going despite it. He found himself wanting to help her heal, to see her smile, to prove to her that life could be good again. The next morning, Fletcher woke before dawn and walked to the main house. Josephine was already up, cooking breakfast, and the smell of bacon and coffee drew him to the kitchen door. "Good morning," she called when she saw him. "Come in and eat. We have a long day ahead of us." Fletcher sat at the small table, feeling strangely domestic as Josephine set a plate of food in front of him. It had been years since anyone had cooked for him, and he found himself unexpectedly moved by the simple gesture. "This is wonderful," he said after the first bite. "Thank you." "You are welcome," Josephine replied, sitting down across from him with her own plate. "I figured you would need a good breakfast before meeting Samuel. He can be a bit intimidating." "Intimidating how?" Fletcher asked. "He is just very sure of himself, very confident. He has made no secret of the fact that he thinks I should sell him my share of the ranch. He believes a woman cannot run a cattle operation successfully." Fletcher felt a flicker of annoyance. "Then I look forward to proving him wrong." Josephine smiled, and it was the first real smile Fletcher had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger and lighting up her eyes. "I think I am going to enjoy having you here, Mr. Vance." "Fletcher," he said. "If we are going to be working together, you should call me Fletcher." "Only if you call me Josephine," she replied. "Josephine it is," Fletcher agreed. After breakfast, they rode out together to find Samuel Miller. He was a large man in his early 40s with a full beard and hard eyes. He looked Fletcher up and down with obvious skepticism when Josephine introduced them. "So you are the new hand," Samuel said. "Josephine mentioned she was hiring someone, though I told her it was a waste of money." "I prefer to think of it as an investment," Josephine said coolly. "Fletcher has extensive experience with cattle ranching, and he is going to help me build up the herd." Samuel snorted. "The herd is fine as it is. What we need is capital to expand, and you do not have that." "My offer still stands, Josephine. Sell me your half, take the money, and go start a new life somewhere easier." "This is my life," Josephine said firmly, "and I am not selling." Samuel shook his head but did not argue further. He spent the next few hours showing Fletcher around the property, pointing out where the cattle tended to graze, where the water sources were, and what the boundaries of the ranch were. Fletcher listened carefully, asking questions and making mental notes. He could see that the operation was sound but could use some improvements, better fencing in some areas, more strategic use of the water sources, and a more organized approach to managing the herd. Over the following weeks, Fletcher threw himself into the work. He repaired fences, checked on the cattle, and helped Samuel with the day-to-day operations. He also spent time with Josephine, learning about her vision for the ranch and sharing his own ideas. Slowly, a partnership began to form between them, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to making the ranch succeed. But more than that, something else began to grow. Fletcher found himself thinking about Josephine constantly, noticing the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the future, the sound of her laugh when he managed to coax one out of her. He told himself it was too soon, that she was still grieving her husband, that he had no right to feel this way. But his heart did not listen to logic. Josephine, too, found her thoughts turning more and more to Fletcher. She noticed the strength in his arms as he lifted fence posts, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to an injured calf, the quiet intelligence in his eyes when they discussed the ranch. She felt guilty for these feelings, as if she were betraying Robert's memory. But at the same time, she could not deny that Fletcher made her feel alive again, made her want a hope for the future. One evening, about 6 weeks after Fletcher had arrived, Josephine invited him to dinner at the main house. It was a simple meal, stew and biscuits, but she had taken extra care with the preparation, and she had even picked some of the wildflowers that had sprouted from the seeds she had planted to put in a jar on the table. "This is nice," Fletcher said, looking around at the cozy interior. "Thank you for inviting me." "I wanted to thank you," Josephine said, "for everything you have done these past weeks. The ranch is starting to feel like it can survive again, like there is a future here. I could not have done that alone." "You are stronger than you think," Fletcher said. "You would have found a way." "Maybe," Josephine allowed, "but it would have been much harder and much lonelier. Having you here has made all the difference." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Fletcher said, "I have been meaning to ask you something." "The cradle in the other room. Do you still stand over it and cry?" Josephine looked down at her plate. "Not as much. Some days I do not look at it at all. Other days I find myself standing there thinking about what might have been. But I also find myself thinking about what might still be, and that is new. That is because of you." "Because of what I said?" Fletcher asked. "About hope?" "Yes," Josephine said. You told me to fill it with hope first. So I have been trying to do that, trying to imagine a future where the cradle is not just a symbol of loss but of possibility. It is hard, but I am trying. Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that surprised them both. You are doing more than trying, Josephine. You are succeeding. I can see it in you, the way you are healing, the way you are looking forward instead of just back. Josephine looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch, the strength and steadiness of him. Fletcher, I need to tell you something. I have been feeling things that I do not know if I should be feeling. It has only been 3 months since Robert died, and I still miss him terribly. But when I am with you, I feel happy. I feel hopeful, and I do not know if that is wrong or if it is just part of moving forward. Fletcher squeezed her hand gently. I do not think there is a right or wrong timeline for grief, Josephine. I think you just have to feel what you feel and trust that you are doing the best you can. And for what it is worth, I have been feeling things too. Things I probably should not be feeling this soon, for a woman I was supposed to just be helping as an employee. Josephine looked up at him, her eyes wide. What kinds of things? Fletcher took a deep breath. I care about you, Josephine, more than I should maybe, but I cannot seem to help it. I think about you all the time. I want to make you smile, to take away your sadness, to show you that life can be good again. But I do not want to rush you or push you into anything you are not ready for. I know you are still grieving, and I respect that. Tears welled up in Josephine's eyes, but they were not tears of grief this time. I care about you too, Fletcher. I was so afraid to admit it, even to myself, because it felt like a betrayal. But Robert would not have wanted me to be alone forever. He would have wanted me to be happy, to live a full life, and you make me feel like that might be possible again. Then let's take it slow, Fletcher said. Let's just see where this goes without any pressure or expectations. We can be partners first, friends, and whatever happens beyond that will happen in its own time. Josephine nodded, wiping at her eyes. I would like that. They finished their dinner, and Fletcher helped Josephine clean up the dishes. As he prepared to leave, she walked him to the door. They stood there for a moment, close enough to touch but not quite touching, and the air between them was charged with possibility. Good night, Josephine, Fletcher said softly. Good night, Fletcher, she replied. He turned to go, but she called him back. Fletcher, thank you for everything. For stopping when you heard me crying, for offering to help, for giving me hope. You have changed my life. You have changed mine too, Fletcher said. And then he was gone, walking back through the darkness to the line shack, his heart full of feelings he had thought he would never have again. The weeks turned into months, and summer gave way to fall. The ranch prospered under Fletcher and Josephine's combined efforts. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other through the challenges. Samuel eventually stopped pushing Josephine to sell, grudgingly accepting that she had found a capable partner in Fletcher. The herd grew healthier and larger, and there was even enough profit to make some improvements to the property. But more importantly, Fletcher and Josephine's relationship deepened. They spent their evenings together, sometimes talking about the ranch, sometimes sharing stories of their pasts, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence and enjoying each other's presence. Fletcher learned about Josephine's childhood, her dreams, her fears. Josephine learned about Fletcher's family, the losses he had endured, the way he had drifted for years trying to outrun his pain. One cool October evening, as they sat on the porch of the main house watching the sunset, Fletcher reached over and took Josephine's hand. It had become a natural gesture between them, this simple touch that said so much without words. Josephine, Fletcher said quietly, I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him, her expression open and trusting. What is it? I love you, Fletcher said simply. I know it has not been that long, and I know you are still healing from losing Robert. But I cannot keep these feelings to myself anymore. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Fletcher, I love you too. I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, maybe from the very first day when you told me to fill the cradle with hope. You have given me back my life, my joy, my belief in the future. Of course I will have you." Fletcher stood and pulled her up with him, wrapping his arms around her and holding her close. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, and he thought he had never felt anything so right in his entire life. "Will you marry me?" he asked, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer except my love and my commitment to you and this ranch. But I promise I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, helping you fill that cradle with hope and life, being the partner you deserve." Josephine pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face radiant with joy. "Yes, Fletcher. Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, a gentle, tender kiss that held all the love and promise of their future together. It was Josephine's first kiss since Robert had died, and though she felt a pang of sadness for what she had lost, she also felt overwhelming gratitude for what she had found. Fletcher was different from Robert, quieter, more reserved, but no less loving. And she knew, deep in her heart, that Robert would be happy for her, that he would approve of the man who was going to help her move forward. They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the church in Awahi. Samuel Miller stood up as a witness, having come to respect Fletcher and accept the partnership. A few other ranchers and townspeople attended, happy to celebrate with the widow who had found love again. Josephine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Fletcher wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed carefully. They exchanged vows in front of the minister, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring, and when they kissed as husband and wife, Josephine felt a sense of completeness she had not known she could feel again. Fletcher moved into the main house after the wedding, finally leaving the line shack behind. It felt strange at first, sharing a home with Josephine as her husband rather than just her employee, but it also felt deeply right. They settled into married life with surprising ease, working the ranch during the day and spending their evenings together, talking and laughing and planning for the future. One evening in early December, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Josephine led Fletcher to the spare room where the cradle still sat. They had not talked about it much since his arrival, both of them giving it space and time. But now, as they stood looking at the beautifully carved wood, Josephine felt ready to address it directly. "I have been thinking," she said softly, "about what you said that first day, about filling it with hope, then filling it with life. I think I have done the first part. I am full of hope now, Fletcher. Hope for us, for our future, for this ranch. And now I am ready to work on the second part." Fletcher wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I want to have a baby," Josephine said. "Your baby, our baby. I want to fill this cradle with life and love and all the joy we can give a child. I want to build a family with you." Fletcher turned her around to face him, his eyes shining with emotion. "There is nothing I want more than that, Josephine. Nothing in the world." "It might not happen right away," Josephine cautioned. "It did not happen with Robert, and I do not know if the problem was with me or with him or just bad luck. But I want to try, Fletcher. I want to try to create something beautiful together." "Then we will try," Fletcher said firmly. "And no matter what happens, whether the cradle gets filled or not, we will have each other. That is what matters most." Josephine kissed him, pouring all her love and hope and dreams into that kiss. And later, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, she sent up a silent prayer that this time, this man, this love, would be the one that finally brought new life into the world. Winter passed slowly in Nevada, the days short and cold, the nights long and quiet. Fletcher and Josephine settled deeper into their marriage, learning each other's rhythms and quirks, building a partnership that was as strong as their love. They worked together on the ranch, making plans for the spring, discussing which cattle to breed and what improvements to make. Samuel continued to manage his portion of the operation, and though he would never be warm toward Fletcher, he treated him with professional respect. In February, Josephine began to suspect that something had changed. Her monthly courses, which had always been regular, did not come. She felt tired, more tired than usual, and there was a strange fluttering in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness. She said nothing to Fletcher at first, afraid to hope, afraid to be disappointed. But when another 2 weeks passed and still her courses did not come, she went to see Dr. Morrison, the town's physician. Dr. Morrison was a kind man in his 60s who had delivered half the babies in Awahi. He examined Josephine carefully and then sat back with a smile. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "I am pleased to tell you that you are with child. I would estimate about 8 weeks along, which means you should deliver sometime in late August or early September." Josephine felt the room spin around her. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be at this stage," Dr. Morrison replied. "All the signs are there. You are going to be a mother, Mrs. Vance." Josephine left the doctor's office in a daze, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. She was going to have a baby. After years of hoping and praying and trying, she was finally going to fill that cradle with life. And this baby would be Fletcher's, a physical manifestation of the love they had built together. She rode home slowly, savoring the secret, trying to decide how to tell Fletcher. She wanted it to be special, wanted to see his face when he realized what she was saying. When she arrived at the house, she found him in the barn mending tack. "Fletcher," she called, and he looked up with a smile. "You are back from town. How did your errand go?" Josephine walked over to him, taking his hands in hers. "Fletcher, do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" "About the cradle, fill it with hope, then fill it with life," Fletcher said. "I remember." "Well," Josephine said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I think we are about to do the second part. Dr. Morrison just confirmed it. I am with child, Fletcher. We are going to have a baby." Fletcher stared at her for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Josephine, we are going to be parents." "We are," she confirmed, tears of joy streaming down her face. "In late summer we will have a son or daughter. Our child, Fletcher, our family." Fletcher set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass, and placed his hand gently on her stomach. "Hello in there, little one," he said softly. "Your mother and I have been waiting for you. We already love you so much." Josephine covered his hand with hers, and they stood there together in the barn, marveling at the miracle they had created. It had been just 10 months since Fletcher had ridden past the house and heard her weeping over the empty cradle. 10 months since he had spoken those words that had changed both their lives. And now, those words were coming true in the most beautiful way possible. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Josephine's life. As her belly grew round with child, she felt a joy and contentment she had never known before. Fletcher was endlessly attentive, insisting she rest more, taking on extra work so she would not tire herself, bringing her wildflowers and sweet treats from town. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories and singing songs, and Josephine would laugh and cry at the same time, overwhelmed by how much love this man had to give. They prepared the nursery together, moving the cradle into a small room off their bedroom and adding other furnishings, a changing table that Fletcher built himself, curtains that Josephine sewed, a rocking chair they found at the general store. They painted the walls a soft yellow, and Josephine hung the quilt her grandmother had made, salvaged from her things after the journey west. In late August, when the heat was at its peak and Josephine was large and uncomfortable, the labor pains began. Dr. Morrison was summoned, and Fletcher paced the porch anxiously while the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, attended to Josephine. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, as the sun reached its zenith, a baby's cry rang out through the house. Fletcher burst through the door, his heart pounding, and found Dr. Morrison smiling at him. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance. You have a healthy son." Fletcher rushed to the bedroom where Josephine lay exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Fletcher, meet our son," she whispered. Fletcher knelt beside the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and Fletcher felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "He is perfect," Fletcher said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both perfect. What should we name him?" Josephine asked. Fletcher thought for a moment, then said, "What about James? James Fletcher Vance. We could call him Jamie when he is small." Josephine smiled. "James Fletcher Vance, I love it. Welcome to the world, Jamie." The baby stirred in her arms, making small snuffling sounds, and Fletcher reached out to touch his tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is holding on to me," Fletcher said wonderingly. "He knows you are his father," Josephine said. "He knows he is loved." Later, when Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Henderson had left and it was just the three of them, Fletcher helped Josephine carry the baby to the nursery. Together, they placed him gently in the cradle that had been empty for so long, the cradle that had represented all of Josephine's grief and loss. But now it held new life, a baby boy who was the living symbol of hope fulfilled and dreams come true. Fletcher wrapped his arm around Josephine as they stood looking down at their sleeping son. "You did it," he said softly. "You filled it with hope, and now you have filled it with life." "We did it," Josephine corrected. "Together. You saved me, Fletcher. When I had given up on everything, you showed me that there was still reason to hope, still reason to live. And now look at us. We have a family, a home, a future." "I did not save you," Fletcher said. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." Josephine leaned against him, feeling safe and loved and complete. "Do you remember that first day?" she asked. "When you came to the door and found me crying?" "I will never forget it," Fletcher said. "I heard you from the road, and something told me I had to stop, that I had to see if I could help. I had no idea that stopping would change my entire life." "Changed both our lives," Josephine said. "I was so lost that day, Fletcher, I could not see past my grief. I thought the cradle would stay empty forever, that I would spend the rest of my life alone and childless. And then you walked in and gave me hope. You told me to fill the cradle with hope first, and I did not understand what you meant at the time, but I do now. Hope was the foundation for everything else. Without hope, none of this would have been possible." They stood in the nursery for a long time, watching their son sleep, marveling at the miracle of him. Finally, Fletcher led Josephine back to bed, insisting she needed to rest and recover her strength. He sat beside her, holding her hand, and they talked quietly about the future, about the ranch, about the family they would raise together. I want more children, Josephine said. If we are blessed enough to have them, I want this house to be full of love and laughter and little voices. I want Jamie to have brothers and sisters. Then that is what we will have, Fletcher promised. As many children as you want, as many as we are blessed with. We will fill this house and this ranch with life and love. Josephine smiled, her eyes drifting closed with exhaustion. I love you, Fletcher Vance. I love you too, Josephine Vance, Fletcher replied. Now rest, I will watch over you both. As Josephine slept, Fletcher returned to the nursery and sat in the rocking chair beside the cradle. He watched his son sleep, still amazed that this tiny person existed, that he and Josephine had created him together. He thought about how much had changed in 1 year, how he had gone from a drifter with no home and no hope to a husband and father with everything to live for. He reached down and gently rocked the cradle, the same cradle that had been the symbol of Josephine's despair when he first met her. Now it was full, holding their son, representing their love and their future. And Fletcher knew that no matter what challenges they might face, they would face them together, as partners, as lovers, as parents. Thank you, he whispered to the sleeping baby. Thank you for choosing us to be your parents. We will do our best by you, little Jamie. We will teach you to be strong and kind and brave. We will show you what love looks like, and we will always, always be here for you. The years that followed were full and rich. Jamie grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's quiet strength. When he was 2, Josephine became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Clara. 3 years after that came another son, Henry, and 2 years after him, twin daughters, Emma and Lily. The house that had once echoed with Josephine's lonely sobs now rang with children's laughter and the sounds of a busy family. Fletcher built additions to accommodate their growing brood, and Josephine filled the rooms with love and warmth. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams, growing to 500 acres with a herd of 400 cattle. Samuel eventually retired and sold his share to Fletcher and Josephine, making them sole owners of the land that had once seemed like such a burden. But success and prosperity were not what mattered most to Fletcher and Josephine. What mattered was the family they had built together, the love they shared, the home they had created. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, they would sit on the porch together and watch the sun set over the Nevada desert, and they would remember that day when their lives had intersected, when grief and hope had collided and created something beautiful. You ever regret it? Josephine asked one evening, her hand in Fletcher's as it had been countless times over the years. Stopping that day, getting involved with a grieving widow and her struggles, Fletcher looked at her, at the woman who had become his whole world, and shook his head. Not for a single moment. That was the best decision I ever made. You and our children are the greatest blessings of my life. Sometimes I still cannot believe how much has changed, Josephine said. I remember standing over that empty cradle, thinking my life was over, that I would never be happy again. And now look at us. 5 children, a successful ranch, a love that grows stronger every day. It seems almost impossible. It was not impossible, Fletcher said. It just took hope. You had to believe that things could get better before they actually did. That is what I meant when I said to fill the cradle with hope first. Hope is the foundation of everything good in life. Josephine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. You taught me that, Fletcher. You saved me from drowning in my grief and showed me that there was still reason to live, to love, to hope. I will never stop being grateful for that. And I will never stop being grateful that you let me help, Fletcher replied. That you trusted me enough to let me into your life. You have given me a home, a family, a purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting, running from my past and my pain. But you gave me a reason to stop running and start building something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Josephine said, "Do you remember what you said about filling the cradle with life? Well, we did not just fill one cradle. We filled 5. And I am so proud of that, Fletcher, proud of what we have built together. 5 cradles and one very full, very happy life," Fletcher agreed. He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Inside the house, they could hear the faint sounds of their children settling down for the night, occasional giggles and whispers floating through the windows. The cradle that had once been Josephine's greatest source of pain had been used for all 5 of their children, and had been carefully stored away now, waiting for the next generation. Someday, Jamie or Clara or one of the others would have children of their own, and the cradle would be brought out again, filled once more with new life and new hope. But that was for the future. For now, Fletcher and Josephine were content to sit on their porch, watching the stars come out one by one, grateful for the life they had built together. They had started with nothing but grief and loss and a stranger's words of encouragement, and they had turned it into something extraordinary. "Fill it with hope, then fill it with life," Josephine murmured, repeating the words that had changed everything. "Best advice anyone ever gave me. Best risk I ever took," Fletcher replied, stopping that day, offering to help. "I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I have never regretted it." As the night deepened around them, Fletcher and Josephine remained on the porch, holding hands and talking softly about their day, their children, their plans for tomorrow. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary life, and yet it was also extraordinary, because it was built on love and hope and the courage to believe in second chances. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, Fletcher and Josephine would tell them the story of how they met, about the empty cradle and the grieving widow and the drifting cowboy who stopped to help. They would talk about hope and healing, about taking risks and trusting in the future. And their children, who had grown up surrounded by love and security, would listen and understand that the life they had been given was precious, built on a foundation of courage and faith. Jamie, the oldest, eventually took over the running of the ranch, bringing his own wife to live in the house where he had grown up. Fletcher and Josephine moved to a smaller house on the property, content to watch their grandchildren grow and to know that the legacy they had built would continue. The cradle was brought out again, filled with Jamie's children and then Clara's and then the others. Each new baby that was placed in it was a testament to the power of hope, to the belief that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of joy. Fletcher and Josephine grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces lining with age, but their love never dimming. They spent their days in peaceful contentment, working in the garden Josephine had cultivated over the years, taking slow walks around the property, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. And always, always, they held hands, that simple gesture that had come to symbolize their bond. On a warm evening in late summer, when Fletcher was 78 and Josephine was 75, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and the air was filled with the sounds of their grandchildren playing nearby. "It has been a good life," Fletcher said quietly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Josephine agreed, "full of love and laughter and hope." "Everything I thought I had lost that day you found me crying, I found again with you. You gave me back my life, Fletcher." "We gave each other life," Fletcher corrected. "We healed each other, helped each other, loved each other." That is what marriage is supposed to be, a partnership where both people lift each other up. Josephine squeezed his hand. I am so grateful I trusted you that day. I was so scared and so broken, but something in your eyes told me you were someone I could believe in, and I was right. I am grateful you let me help, Fletcher said. I had been running for so long, so afraid to stop and put down roots because I thought if I did, I would just lose everything again like I lost my family. But you showed me that the risk is worth it, that love is worth the possibility of loss. Because even if we only get a short time together, it is better than never having loved at all. They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. And as the first stars began to appear, Fletcher and Josephine remained on their porch, two people who had found each other in the midst of grief and had built something beautiful together, a testament to the power of hope and the enduring strength of love. Their story had started with an empty cradle and a stranger's words of encouragement. It had grown into a life filled with children and grandchildren, with hard work and success, with challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. And through it all, the core truth remained the same, that hope is the foundation of everything good, and that love, once found, can transform even the darkest sorrow into the brightest joy. As the night settled around them, Fletcher and Josephine finally rose from their chairs and went inside, ready to rest after another full day. They climbed into bed together, as they had done for over 50 years, and Fletcher pulled Josephine close. I love you, he whispered. Today, tomorrow, and always. I love you too, Josephine replied. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for giving me hope. Thank you for everything. They fell asleep in each other's arms, two souls intertwined, two hearts beating as one. And somewhere in the house that Jamie now occupied with his family, the old cradle rocked gently, filled once more with new life, a symbol of the enduring legacy that Fletcher and Josephine had created together. A legacy built on hope, sustained by love, and passed down through generations. A reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of light, always the chance for a new beginning, always the hope of filling an empty cradle with life and love and joy. The story of Fletcher and Josephine became a cherished family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Their grandchildren would ask to hear about the day Grandpa found Grandma crying, about the words he spoke that changed everything, about the love that grew from grief and hope. And each time the story was told, it reinforced the values that Fletcher and Josephine had lived by: courage, faith, love, and the belief that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. In the end, Fletcher and Josephine's greatest legacy was not the successful ranch they had built or the land they had cultivated, but the family they had created and the love they had shared. They had taken an empty cradle and filled it with hope, then with life, and in doing so, they had filled their own lives with meaning and purpose and joy. They had proven that second chances are real, that love can bloom even in the aftermath of loss, and that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to stop, to listen, and to offer hope when hope seems lost. Their story was a testament to the human spirit's resilience, to the power of kindness and compassion, and to the enduring truth that love, in all its forms, is the greatest gift we can give and receive. And so the cradle continued to rock, generation after generation, filled with new life and new hope, a living symbol of Fletcher and Josephine's love and the beautiful legacy they had left behind.